Before we get into this week's episode, I have a very special announcement I'd like to share with you all. As my valued listeners, I wanted you to be the first to know about the inaugural Women and Wealth Catalyst Summit that I'll be hosting in 2025. I hope you'll join me and some other amazing women on March 27th at the Golden Gate Club in San Francisco for a full day of impactful sessions, including fireside conversations, intimate panels, and engaging discussions with values-aligned partners. Do not miss this opportunity to ignite your path to financial success and become part of a supportive network committed to achieving wealth. Reserve your spot today at women.win. That's right, ladies, women.win. And join us for a day that will shape your financial future. If you can't join us in San Francisco, be sure to stay tuned for New York City dates and venues soon to be announced. I can't wait to see you all there.
Welcome to Getting Rich Together, the show for successful women who are looking to take their financial futures to the next level. I'm your host, Shama Bunton. When I started my wealth building journey, nobody knocked on my door to give me all the answers. So I want to talk to the experts who've done it and bring the answers to you so we can discover the right opportunities that will help us achieve the financial futures we've always dreamed of together and have fun doing it. So let's dive into this episode and start getting rich together. Oh, Jen Nash, I am just so excited to have you here today. Ladies, we are sitting with an incredible connector-in-chief, someone who has developed in their lifetime an incredible gift to be able to help others unlock, educate, find their purpose and power, and create more meaningful relationships, and therefore a more meaningful world. Now, Jen, most people will know you from all the fantastic things that you do into the world, inspiring and leading and helping others unlock themselves. But very few people might actually know the behind the scenes of your money stories. And so I'd like to welcome you to Getting Rich Together. And thank you for being here today to shed a light on your life.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful introduction. And yes, I am truly excited about this share because I honestly wish that podcasts like this had been around when I was, coming up and out of college and reading all the books that were all written by men.
Yeah, no joke. And now there happens to be a few more books out there written by women, but the tides haven't quite turned yet. And hopefully we are at the beginning of something far more powerful and meaningful than ourselves. So Jen, let's get started with a young Jen, a Jen that wasn't so wise, a more young, naive Jen at maybe the ages of 5 or 6 years old when things like toys and playtime was really important, and hopefully still today. But I'd love to wind back the time and have you take us into what life was like for you growing up. Where did you grow up? What were your parents like? What were some of the earliest impressions that you had around money? What did it mean to you back then?
Oh, so fun. So it's funny because I always think there's two types of kids. There's the spender kid and the saver kid. My brother was the spender and I was the saver. So I remember when my mom gave us allowances and it was in the 70s and I got $5 a week and it was Hong Kong dollars because I lived in Hong Kong. So my dad is Australian. My mom is originally American, but became Canadian. And my brother and I were raised as Canadians and we lived all over Canada. We moved a whole bunch. And then when I was 6, we moved to Malaysia. And then when I was 7, we moved to Hong Kong, and thus began my love affair with collecting an allowance. And I was definitely like, well, what can I do to make more money? Whereas my brother was spending it like right away. And when I was 10, we moved to Tokyo, and it was the 80s now. And pretty much if you had any kind of a look in the 80s and you were, a gaijin white kid, you could model. So I started modeling and I started saving all my modeling money. And I remember at one point I was 12 and I made $1,000 dancing on a whale with a Japanese celebrity. And it's so funny. I actually showed a friend. They made a cast of my chest, my arms, my calves, and my nose. And they let me keep the cast of my nose because they wanted the Pinocchio nose that they were creating for me because I was a girl Pinocchio dancing on a whale with a Japanese celebrity, as one does. By the way, the product was a VCR because, I mean, that makes perfect sense, right? Total sense. But I remember being like, $1,000, right? And like, sometime not long after, I was not a spender, but I really missed Hong Kong. And without my mom's permission, I went and bought a round trip ticket to Hong Kong because I was like, wow, we have school vacation coming up. I'm just going to pop over there.
And how old were you when you bought this plane ticket?
12.
Oh my God.
It's funny. I told a therapist this a bunch of years ago and she was like, wait, and your mom let you go?
Like, did she?
And it's like, yeah. But the funny thing is 12-year-olds don't check the weather. It was typhoon season. I spent the entire week indoors because it was raining. But getting back to the money, saving was like huge. Earning was huge. I babysat. I acted in plays. I'm not an actress, but I gave it a shot. And then when I moved to Australia, when I was 16, I got my first job. I worked as a stockroom clerk for a hot second in a health food store. And I remember just dreaming about being a cashier in a chicken shop. I was like, that's when I'll know I've made it. So I think you're going to interview people that are going to be like, well, I was in my garage starting my tech company. And it was funny because I got a job at the chicken shop, but the owner was like, we start you on dishes. So I was scrubbing pots for I think it took me 10 days to realize I could do better. And I ended up working at a company that was a complete ripoff of Haagen-Dazs called Norgenvaz. And you can't make this stuff up. Norgenvaz was all the same ideas of Haagen-Dazs, like very high quality, real eggs, heavy cream, like great ingredients. And I literally scooped ice cream and made thick shakes.
Oh my gosh, Jen. So here you are, this young woman who's being thrust into different cultural communities and schools and learning about identity, which was undoubtedly confusing and not really the topic of this conversation, but identity, and then also seeing how other people were living their lives. Money is such an integral part of how we look at the world around us. How did you sort of, coming from these lenses of experiences and then eventually launching yourself off into university, where was your mind and your spirit around money and culture? How did you see yourself fitting?
It's an interesting question because my parents were both, I would say, middle class to lower middle class. My mom's mother was an entrepreneur businesswoman. That just doesn't exist in the 50s and 60s. She ran a typing school because she had to, and as a result was able to put 2 of her kids through Vassar.
Wow.
Right. And so my mom sort of had this incredibly lofty education, but then every item she spent on, she documented what it costs. And I have letters from the 60s to her mom, all about her honeymoon, and she was making her clothes. Her mom was making her clothes. So my mom was very frugal and very you don't need that. I remember even from a young age, I wanted a Baby Alive doll. And my mom was like, you don't need that. And I asked her for 2 years. And then by the time she got it for me, I was like, yeah, whatever. She waited too long. She did regret that at one point. But my dad had a love of fine things, but he was also quite practical. So I think I grew up in this household that valued art, valued good food, valued manners, but they were conservative. And at the same time, I mean, it sounds like I'm living the life, right? I'm an expat, I'm flying around, I'm going to a variety of schools, some very high end, some very not, depending on which country we were living in. And so I was exposed to girls who were horseback riding on their horses that were in their backyards with their own trainers, right? So complete dichotomy in terms of wow, that was not my experience. So it was interesting because I think I understood there was a lot more, but I think my mom was very big on the idea of having enough, but it did kind of change somewhat radically when my dad died. So my dad died when I was 18, and he had become manic depressive. And so he withdrew all his savings and sold a bunch of real estate and ran off to Australia, but under the guise of needing more sunshine and that would help his brain. And my mom said, okay. And the problem was he never came back, and he lost all of that money into investments. And so all she was left with was the house we lived in. So you can imagine, here's this 50-something-year-old woman with 2 kids about to go into college. And I'm like, well, I'd like to go to Parsons in America, which is not free.
No.
And all of the Canadian universities are basically free compared to at the time, I think Parsons was $20,000-$25,000 a semester. And, I think McGill or UFT, I think it was $5,000 for the whole year. So all of a sudden, scarcity really came into play. And I think my mom really tried to protect me from that. I think it's taken me some of the last 25 years to really understand how much she shepherded my brother and I. But at the same time, she was very much into the notion of, you're an adult now. You're 18, you're 20, you're 21. So for instance, if I borrowed money, it was expected I paid it back. Like at one point I borrowed $1,000 to go on a trip. She expected that money back. And then like a decade later, I borrowed $30,000 to do a real estate transaction. And I told her, I will give you 6% interest every year as long as the investment rides. And then I will pay you your investment in full. She was so proud every year when she got that small check. She was so proud. And it was only a couple of $1,000s, but she loved it. Right. And I remember I needed to buy a new Mac when I got out of college. And that was one of the few times where I think she really wanted to give it to me, but she couldn't. So she made this deal with me. She goes, you get published, you publish something anywhere, I'll pay for your laptop. But if you don't, you have to buy it.
Wow.
Oh, you can better believe I got published.
Where did you get published?
Yeah.
Tell me about the experience.
It was a really interesting article about the juxtaposition of how art school doesn't prepare graphic designers and creative directors for the real world. And the headline was, "Welcome to the Real World, Kid."
Wow.
And it was literally like, here's the school of hard knocks, and everything that school has taught you is wrong. And now you have to deal with budgets and restrictions. And, it was that. And it was in something like the One Show magazine. It was something well respected. I can't quite remember, but it was a graphic design magazine.
How cool, John. How it also what a unique experience of having engaging, whether that is through the lens of, hey, we're going to write up this contract together, or hey, we're going to, think of these incentives or just ways of making things have meaning and make sense, which is very different from a lot of schools of thought around, oh, I'm just going to give the allowance or just give it and, sort of have no learnings attached to it. Or also from the perspective of, I'm not going to give anything and just let you, kind of figure things out on your own. And so there's a really interesting, I feel like we can't go through life without money trauma. The question is, what does it look like and how does it come to you? And, what is the formula for that? But it does sound like she was very early on intellectually engaging you and also emotionally engaging you with why might I want this? Or what might it be for? Or how do I sort of dangle these carrots? And that I think is so interesting and unique. Okay, so at Parsons, you end up graduating Parsons. Do you end up staying in New York? Tell me a little bit about what are your early sort of career moves? And obviously, Parsons is not cheap. Living in New York City, very expensive. Young people have the best time as I did, but also the most broke we've ever been. Tell me a little bit about some of your early money stories being in New York post-university.
So mom, being frugal and careful, I think she was extremely aware of the fact that there was so much wealth projected around us as we were growing up in all these countries. And so, for instance, you were saying with regards to allowances, our allowances were earned. You had to empty the dishwasher. You had to take the trash out. You had to feed the cat, right? It was that kind of stuff. So my mom, after freshman year was over, and this is how you know you care. My freshman year dorm was $650 a month. I don't know if you know what yours was, but I sure do. My mom found a place called the Catherine House, which was on 13th and 6th, fantastic location, West Village, 1 block from my school. That was a ladies' residence. And you got a bedroom with a sink and a closet and enough room for me to put a drafting table in. And the bathroom was down the hall. You got breakfast and dinner and 1 meal on weekends for $450 a month. And all utilities were paid, right? So this is before internet and before cell phones, because yes, I'm that old. So I actually could afford New York. Now, it wasn't great for the boyfriend situation because we had to like figure stuff out before Airbnb, but you know, because he couldn't stay there because it was for women only. But I think navigating after school around money was interesting because I kept my overhead incredibly low. And that is something that I have perfected, I would say, throughout the whole of my life. Mm. Like I have a rent stabilized apartment in New York City, and I have had it since I was in my 20s. And it's, you know, like everybody always says the same thing. You can never give it up. I do wonder what would happen if I did, though.
Let's not find out.
Yeah. But the thing is like, if you keep your overhead low, like I can honestly say I have never balanced a checkbook. I've never really been terrified. And it's interesting because I remember being like, how could I be terrified now when I have savings when I wasn't terrified then? And I graduated and I didn't go get a job. I freelanced for a recruiter under the table making cash while I reworked my portfolio because I decided I wanted it to be different, more copywriting focused. And then at the same time, I was like freelancing, running a design agency out of the New York Times, which is where I had a job for the last 2 years. Yeah, junior and senior year, I worked at the New York Times. And so I would be at the New York Times at 5 a.m. using their computers and their printers to get my designs done and printed so that I could go and present them to my clients. And you know what? I think I was fine.
Yeah.
I paid my bills, and eventually, you know, it was a really big day. I left Catherine House because I really wanted to cook. And I got a new apartment, and it was so funny. My roommate turned out to be crazy. So within 6 months, I was like, I can't do a roommate because I just can't go through this again. And I think I was paying $550 at that point. And so then I was like, the max I can pay is $700. And every real estate agent told me I was crazy. And I just kept saying, I believe. And it's funny because you hear other people tell these stories, but in this case, this totally was my story. And I looked for 3 months and everybody just kept telling me, you're not going to find it. It doesn't exist. And one morning, it was literally around the corner from my then apartment. And, you know, I had a fax machine, and one of my closest friends faxed me the New York Times real estate section early because we could get access to it before it was launched. And I literally like ran down the street and like ran in. I was like, is it still available? And, you know, scored the $700 1 bedroom.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, but I think to your point, having a place that you're not worried about paying rent frees you up to travel, frees you up to take more interesting jobs. I took my first big job, which was a couple of years later. I was making $100,000 because it was $400 a day working at Ogilvy and Mather. I was a copywriter, and I was, I think, 26 years old. And I got to tell you, I literally was like, oh my God, how can this be? I just achieved all my goals. I clearly did not pick the right goals because this was way too easy. And so the .com boom was really starting. And I started going to parties and listening to people. And I was already doing digital. So I was really curious.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up taking, $45,000 pay cut to go work at a startup.
Wow.
Now, I think a man would have negotiated better. It just didn't occur to me that when he said 55, I should not say, well, I really can't go less than 65. You know what I mean? Like, it never occurred to me. But to me, I was like, okay, I've already achieved all my goals. Let's go learn something.
I love that. So talk to me. Let's start talking about, obviously there's career exploration. Your career has taken a number of turns as you've sort of drafted and fallen into your purpose. And then certainly wealth building, right? I feel like our lives are inextricable from the value we place on ourselves, on our time, on our resources. And obviously, creating these financial systems and security and just ways of creating the foundation, if you will. Walk me through a little bit of how your financial journey kind of evolved through the years. How did your thesis on money shift and change? What were some of your early investments? How did that look for you?
Great question. So I probably started pretty normally. I was head of fun was my official title for women in new media in the 90s. And so I went to a lot of events, and one of them was hosted by a wealth advisor at Merrill Lynch. She seemed cool. She seemed smart. She knew what she was talking about. So I was in my 20s and I invested everything I earned in my 20s with Merrill Lynch. And when the dot-com bomb exploded in 2000, I lost everything. And I wasn't smart enough to sue. A friend of mine did because it was too much, right? So yeah, it was too much allocated towards the 401k or something. There was a reason she got her money back. So I was really burned and I started wondering, what am I going to do? Because I am not going to ever get anywhere just having a job in this endless cycle. Because in advertising, you don't really make enough to go to the next level. So I started reading books. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The Wealthy Barber, The Millionaire Next Door, all the classics. And I loved Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad so much that I bought his next book, which is Cash Flow Quadrant. And then I talked a friend into buying the game. There's a game. And if you play the game twice and win twice, he basically says, you're great, go forward. So I did that, won twice.
You're done.
And I was like, yeah, exactly. I'm done. I was like, okay. So at that point, I knew I had to get into real estate. And so believe it or not, I tried to raise a real estate fund.
Wow.
I went to art school. I got 4 friends, 2 married couples to invest. And we ended up buying a 24-unit building in Syracuse.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was like 31, 32. Long story short, I learned so much. You don't want to partner with people that don't have similar communication styles. You don't want to partner with people who, don't want to really connect with you, right? You really want to align with people on their long-term investment vision and strategy. The good news is I got everybody their 6% return, including my mom. And after 5 years, I forced the sale of the property, got out of the transaction, which was great. And by then, I had literally quit advertising for a hot second, didn't last long, moved to the boonies in Pennsylvania, and was studying property management, all because of a very random connection. And so my goal was to start buying houses, renovating them, and renting them out. And I figured if I could get going by the time I was 34, 35, in 20 years at 55, I would have a passive income stream. The way I did it, because I was terrified, I didn't know anybody in real estate, I didn't know anything about construction, is I ended up meeting a guy and he became my partner, my life partner, as well as my business partner for 13 years. And so I would identify the houses, I would buy them, he would renovate them, and then I would manage them. I got the shabby end of that stick, and I learned a lot about how it would be much better to really talk about how you're structuring partnerships. And I think the biggest mistake that I made is feeling like I had to give him 50%.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
Because the thing is a contractor for some of the houses would have made maybe $40,000-$60,000. The house is worth $400. So he ended up with $200.
I see.
Now, admittedly, he waited, 13 years to take his return. But because I kept refinancing out, I was able to expand our holdings. But yeah, lessons learned, contracts, ladies, contracts.
So tell me, as far as building this real estate portfolio, obviously you'd had experience with the first one, which honestly, it's so bold to say, hey, I'm going to go in and buy this property with some friends and like manage the whole transaction and take the lead. And then also to obviously have an actual return and be able to say, hey, this is successful, and parlay that into the growth of this empire that you were building. How many properties did you end up buying over the course of this like real estate endeavor? And
so I want, as much as I love the story you're painting, I'm going to get really real. I made no money for the 5 years I invested in that huge property. None.
Wow.
And I'll tell you why. I let someone else handle the buying transaction, and they were not good at that. And so they actually overpaid, and we hired a company which identified this opportunity for us. And it was interesting. They gave us 2 choices in the entire country: Lubbock, Texas, Syracuse, New York. By the way, Lubbock, Texas is worth 400 to 800% more now than it was. Lubbock, Texas did go bananas because I was so freaked out about doing this because it's exactly what you say. It's overwhelming. I was so freaked out. I was like, let's go analytics. Let's go analytics. So I found a company that analyzed markets.
Wow.
And so they took you in. They took a percentage of the real estate deal. It was great for them. You paid them. And then they helped you find a management company. So I put a management company in place, which, by the way, you still have to manage a management company. I put in a management company, and in the end, I walked away just giving my investors their 6% and all their return. So it was a solid, safe, decent investment. But for me, not a home run. So I still have no money. And the way I did my next house was when I got to Pennsylvania, I found out that if you have never bought a house and you have good credit, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac will give you a home, no money down. And I believe this is still the case because I was talking to someone about this recently. So you can even roll your mortgage costs into the loan, which I did. So I think the whole thing cost me like $3,500. And that was for the appraisal and maybe something else. There was maybe the title work. Right. I think I had to pay for the title work. So I bought a house for like $205,000. And based on my research, I believed it to be worth $325,000. But I was so terrified that I kept looking at houses even while I had it under contract. And I found a for sale by owner. And I found out that there were 3 or 4 kids. And so I decided to make an offer, a very low offer that was divided by 4. So I offered them $80,000. Honestly, it was, in hindsight, maybe a little high, actually. So houses in that area, brand new construction, sell for around $250,000. This is all downtown Philadelphia 20 years ago. And so the way I did that deal, nobody should do, but I had read Rich Dad. And one of the very cool things is he talks about the creative way you can structure things with real estate. And I really got into that. So what I did was I used my credit cards to renovate that house before I owned it. The lawyer was like, this is dangerous, right? They could just tell you they're not letting you buy the house and take it back. I'm like, well, they've been your friends, because it turns out the lawyer was their friends for 15, 20 years. I said, they've been your friends. Do you trust them? And she said, yeah, I trust them. So sure enough, 6 months later, I went to close and I refinanced, and the house appraised for $250,000. And so I refinanced out all the money and I paid for both house renovations.
Oh my gosh, Jen, what a mind you have to be able to, again, not just read and hear information, but to be able to really absorb, execute, and do it. Oh my gosh, how did that feel?
The first house, I thought I gave myself shingles. I like had some kind of violent outbreak. I was so sick. The stress crushed me. Honestly, I was terrified. I'd only ever bought a car. Like that's the biggest thing I'd ever bought. And that was the year before. Like I don't like to own stuff. I'm like, my parents kind of raised us anti-stuff. Plane tickets are my love language. Let's go. So it was so hard. And then the second house, it was such a good deal. I just felt like I had to do it. Now, to his credit, my partner worked very hard to get them both done. And at that time, I was now back working a full-time job in advertising, you know, making a great salary, probably close to $200,000 at that point. And so I could afford stuff, right? So I could pay for everything. And I knew that no matter what, I was going to be okay. And so when we refinanced out in October of 2005, I was like, we're going to Africa. I want to check something off my list because what a year. And so I rewarded us with a trip to Zanzibar and Tanzania, and I climbed Kilimanjaro and did all that stuff. Safari. I mean, you got to do it at some point. It's wonderful. But like for me, that was a huge check. And it's interesting because at this point in time, and for the next 3 years, I was getting approved for houses, and I am not exaggerating. I was getting approved for houses in 10 minutes on a phone call with a mortgage broker.
Wow.
And this is why we had the housing crash of 2008, because not everybody is cautious and careful and investing what they can, you know, manage debt-wise.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Yeah. So your other question was how many? So that's 2. And then there was the big building before. And then there was another one. I did a flip. And then one of them was really cool. My broker said, you should buy that house. I'm like, why? It's tiny. He said, because that huge side yard is part of it. And you could subdivide off the yard and that would pay for the house. And so I did that. And while I was subdividing the land, I found out that the only way you can have a roof deck is if you have land. So I got the roof deck applied and approved before the subdivision happened and got the roof deck built. And now I own one of the smallest houses in Philadelphia, but it has a roof deck.
So Jen, throughout these acquisitions and flipping homes, obviously you became, I would imagine it seems like it just so much more astute and like being able to see things and get really familiar with deals. You know, how did your thesis on money change over time? You know, obviously now looking backwards as to like how you were raised and, you know, seeing your life in perspective as a young person now sort of in the throngs of this like real estate life, you know, what were the things that you were concerned about as you were building this portfolio, you know, keeping a full-time job, now finding yourself deep into real estate?
Yeah. So I'll be honest, I got very burned by losing everything in the stock market. And so my mom passed in 2015 and I randomly ended up in Florida and I ended up buying some cottages in Florida, which I proceeded to renovate and turn into a 5-star Airbnb, which I found an amazing woman who ran them for almost 5 years. And then when we came out of the pandemic, I don't know if you remember about what happened to real estate prices in Florida. I was like, you know what? I'm going to sell those. And I put that money in the market. And so to your other point, yes, anytime anyone has ever offered me a 401k, I've been a consultant most of my life, so they don't offer me 401ks very often, but I have maxed it out. But also I have SAPs and I have basically, if you talk to an accountant and they tell you to do it for tax purposes, I've done it, right? Like if they're like, put 5K in a Vanguard fund, that's this, that, and the other thing. I did it. So my goal was very simple. And I think, honestly, I probably lowballed it, but I felt like somehow the fears of my mother, I think we all have generational financial trauma, as you were saying. And mine was, I don't want to be an older woman on my own with like little to no resources. And I think she felt like that to some degree, because even though she remarried, he financially abandoned her in the long term in that relationship. Even though I don't think I knew it, I knew it. So for me, my goal was, can I get passive income from real estate, and can I get passive income from the stock market and have it add up to somewhere over $20,000? Now that's not a bonanza, but if you're also still working, like that's a nice highway to have, to move forward. The people that I know that are struggling in their late 40s and early 50s, they're dealing with kid debt, college debt, and they don't have any of the passive income streams. And my trick, honestly, was I took no money from my houses and I put them all on 15 to 20-year loans. So they all got paid off a lot faster. But, there's no income, and I probably had to spend to keep them up. But you're right. I didn't had I done the crypto as hard as I think I could have, that might have done more windfalls. But instead, I invested in startups with my time and energy. And I continue to be fascinated by that. But that always feels like a gamble.
Totally.
Right? And so for me, there's safety in real estate because I manage it. I get it. I understand it now. I mean, it really is true. Location, location, location. But more than that, you have to understand the location, right? You can't just be like, oh, I'm going to buy in Topeka. Looks like a good deal. Like if you don't know that neighborhood, don't be buying in Topeka. So yeah, it's not super diversified. But I would say now since 21, it's slightly heavier in real estate, but it's almost, I'd say it's like 45 to 65. So it's much more balanced because one of the best books that I've ever read is called The Smartest Portfolio You'll Ever Own. And long term, the stock market does throw off about 11% consistently. And it has since the early 1900s. So, I mean, I really am a big fan of Vanguard target end retirement date products and things that are basically index funds and ETFs, because to some degree you can set it and forget it. And I am not going to be sitting here checking my stocks. I don't want that anxiety. That's not for me. But I know people that love it, but that's not for me. And I'm okay with that.
That's a big part of, investing with your values, what's important to you, like what makes sense, what feels right, and it changes and we wayfind and we're able to be more in tune with who we are and therefore more in tune with where our money goes, and I think that that's like such a deep process of self-awareness to sort of be able to sit here and say, this is how I've invested my time, my money, my resources, because this is how I choose to live my life. And this is me also honoring the parts of myself that say, hey, I need security and real estate feels more secure. And so I'm going to listen to that, even though you certainly could have taken the same amount of money and become an LP at a number of different funds, and sort of exercise your capital in other ways. So I think that's really powerful. So as you stand here today, Jen, as someone who's a thought leader who is, working deeply in the trenches with communities and clients and coaching and helping to unlock, you're looking at this body of work that is ahead of you. Certainly I would call you financially just fearless in how you talk about money, investing, and really in that personal way, which I think is very inspiring to other women to hear and feel that. If you were to imagine yourself into the future at some age of, 102, and you're looking backwards at your continuing, that would kind of put you, put us all pretty young still, right? It's like we've got a lot of living and a lot more to do. So where do you see legacy and financial impact and impact in general as you reflect back on this beautiful life at that lovely age of 102?
Oh, I love that. It's interesting because I have been thinking more about legacy and give back. And I am such an advocate for the earth and how much we torture it. And I've been wondering how to radically support the oceans and support more awareness around overfishing. And I, besides tithing and potentially volunteering, because for a few years I lived in Turks and Caicos, and I think there's a lot of opportunity around helping countries like that. Even though they have a lot of money, they don't have infrastructure around protecting their reefs through buoy programs. Even something as small as that can have a really big impact on small, vital ecosystems. Because when we destroy the reef, we actually destroy that part of the coastline and that little ecosystem. So I've been thinking about how can I allocate part of my income more proactively. And it's funny, I love that you said I could become an LP in a startup. Like, even as you said that, my whole body tensed. I was like, oh my God. Because one of the nicest things that I did for myself is, as I left advertising and marketing and became an executive coach and a speaker and an author, the only way I could do that was because I have this passive income, and I started to pay the houses off. You know, maybe they had $40,000 or $70,000 left on the loans. And I ran the numbers and I was like, you know what? I'd rather have the money coming in with no guilt. Mm-hmm. I know that I'm not sure that entirely makes sense, because you could argue opportunity costs. Like, maybe you're right, I should have put that money in something that was going to work harder. But the problem with startups is it's always a giant question mark. But I appreciate your legacy question. I feel like I'm going to have to give more thought to that. But I think when you talk to powerful people and you listen to podcasts about this, we do get inspired, like what's important. And for me, protecting oceans and honestly the fish in the oceans, because I've been a diver since I was 26 and I don't dive very often anymore because there's honestly nothing to see. And it breaks my heart a little bit. But I would love to see that change. So if I could be part of that change, I'd be delighted.
Wow, I love that. And Jen, how can we, the audience, support you? What are you calling in right now? What are the things that you're looking to create momentum and movement around? How can we evangelize your mission?
I love the way you put that. I think I've done over 70 podcasts and no one's ever put it quite so lyrically. Thank you, Shama. That's really lovely. I am looking to get on more stages. I love connecting with people. I talk about how tiny connections change lives, both personally and at work. And when we connect with our clients and our teams, we're always driving profitability, but at the same time, we're driving joy. And so being able to like connect the dots and do that on stages is really exciting for me. So that's what I'm calling in, as well as I love my one-on-one clients. I love working with driven leaders who are looking to have more impact.
Amazing. Jen Nash, thank you for unfolding to us your beautiful life story. You know, the ways in which you've navigated wealth building, which really feels like a combination of building security and freedom, is very inspiring. And, you know, I think the big thing takeaway for me is, you know, being able to really double down and get specific in something that you feel really passionate around, because real estate feels like it doesn't just make sense on paper, but emotionally and intuitive, it makes sense to you. And it feels like something that you've been able to develop and cultivate because it satisfies all these different parts, you know. And I think that using our capital to satisfy all the different things is really powerful. So thank you so much for being here today. I'm so grateful.
Oh, thank you. This was awesome. And I am excited to support your listeners any way I can.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Getting Rich Together. Please take a minute to subscribe. And if you like this episode, I'd love it if you could share it with a friend who is ready to elevate their financial future. Until next time, let's keep getting rich together.